Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the NDIS Circle. I'm Dan McCutcheon and today we have our first ever guest. So everyone that's been listening is sick of watching me monologue at the camera and talk about NDIS legislation and boring stuff like that. So we got Rod on today, Rod Davies, our first ever guest. So I'm super excited.
Having me, Dan.
Rod is the CEO of 1-to-1, which is a disability support provider based here in WA. 1-to-1 provides supports to people with physical, intellectual, psychosocial and neurological disabilities by creating tailored supports in partnership with the person living with a disability and their family. These supports aren't cookie cutter, they don't come off the shelf. Services are bespoke and individually designed around each person's unique needs and situation. Rod has been supporting people with disabilities for over 20 years, I think, including as a co-resident support worker, an LAC for Disability Services Commission, which was pre-NDIS days in WA. And prior to working at 1-to-1 as the CEO, was working as a senior manager for My Place, who's a well-known and respected individualised disability support provider. Welcome to the podcast, Rod. Did I miss anything?
Oh, look, actually, to be honest, you dropped out a little bit there, so I hope this works okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you got it well. Hey, thank you for inviting me to speak with you, Dan. I appreciate it.
No stress. Yeah, we're both praying that we don't have any tech issues. This is the first time we've done a two-way conversation. So let's see how it goes. Yeah. So yeah, Rod, I wanted to get you on specifically to talk really obviously about 1-to-1 and a bit of your sort of personal story, but also to talk about ILOs or Individualised Living Options. I know that's a particular passion of yours, and I know for me, even being in the industry for 13 years now, ILOs are still something I know about, but I feel like I don't have a really in-depth understanding of them and how they might look. And I think that's because, you know, in keeping with what they are so individualised and unique to each person. So there's not sort of one set definition because it looks so differently for each person. But I thought maybe we could just frame up the conversation and maybe Rod, you could explain, you know, what is an ILO in the context of the NDIS and sort of how do they differ from more traditional models like SIL, supported independent living and that group home sort of environment?
Yeah, sure. So look, individualised living arrangements are arrangements that are designed around one person that are unique to them and delivered uniquely to them, you know. So I suppose they differ from, say, group homes where traditionally what governments would do is they'd commission services. So they'd say, okay, we need a 1,000-bed institution, go build it, you know.
Yeah, like that block funding model?
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
But even in the NDIS context, lots of providers go out there and they build a house, you know, they have a house, they have 6 beds in it, and then they fill that up with people, you know. So essentially what occurs is it's a model of support whereby we fit people into the institution, whereas what we seek to do is build the support arrangement around each person. So we don't start with this is how it's going to be. It's to say, who are you, what do you want, what do you need? And we design and deliver that service uniquely to that one person. So that's fundamentally the difference. They're the individualised arrangements that are alternatives to group homes and institutions. It's tricky, actually. You know, one of the things that I often sort of try to highlight is that what we do is an approach to supporting people. So it's not a model, you know. And I think I had a chat with you previously about this, that group home is a model of support. And when I say group home, you know, most people, in their mind, they know what I'm talking about, you know. They're kind of different. There's some much better than others, you know, for sure.
So a group home, that's your standard sort of, you know, 3 people with a disability in a house. You've got one staff member maybe doing, you know, 3 staff members throughout the day, each doing 8-hour shifts, and the person with disability fits into a provider's existing, you know, they might even carry the lease for the property, they might own the property, that's their sort of business model, and then the participant is sort of fitting into that and receiving supports, and they don't really have that choice and control over how and when and where they receive that support. Once they're in that model, it's sort of, you know, fit in with the structure of the provider.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, each group home will be different. They have different characters. Some group homes are much bigger than others, so they might have 6 people. There might be, you know, so 3 is sort of the magic number that's sort of floated around at the moment. But fundamentally, a group home is a model of support and they're replicable, you know, and not just in Australia, across the world there are group homes. Whereas what we do though is each arrangement is designed around the person. We support over 100 people, and no two people have the same arrangement, you know. So if you like, we have over 100 different models of support that are tailored to each person.
Wow.
And where this is challenging for us is that people ring up and they say, so what do you guys do? And if I said to them, we do group homes, they'd go, oh yeah, I get you, I know what you do. But for us, it's like every person has their own arrangement, and it's hard to explain what it is. That's why it's important, I suppose, for us to kind of highlight that what we do is an approach to supporting people. It's about kind of understanding who that person is, what do they want, what do they need, working in partnership with them and their family and the people who love them and care about them, and trying to design and deliver that arrangement for them, you know?
Yeah, and I think like my work as a support coordinator and previously, I think people don't know that there are some more innovative sort of options out there. They think this is not all families, so I'm making a generalization here, but yeah. I think that, you know, some families that I've worked with and supported think it's either the family home where often there's a carer that's experiencing care burnout, overwhelm and stress. They've been caring for someone for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They might be experiencing health issues of their own. They might be getting older, and they think it's family home or a group home environment, and they don't want their loved one to go into a group home environment. I heard stories of, you know, obviously this is not every group home, but there can be, you know, limited safeguarding. It can be abuse and neglect, things that happen in those sorts of environments. And as a family member, obviously with a loved one, you want to see them go into the best sort of environment possible if you're no longer able to care for them. And I think people can think it's either the family home or the group home. And the fact is that there are other options out there, but I think it's just about that education and sort of spreading that message. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think previously, before the NDIS, you know, in Western Australia, the state government had quite a large investment in the thinking of the disability sector, but also families and people with disabilities about, you know, considering what other options could be possible and how might I live outside of a group home. And so, you know, more than any other state in our country, you know, Western Australia went a long way towards, you know, setting up lots of these individualised living arrangements. However, with the onset of the NDIS over the last, I don't know, 10, 12 years or however long it's been, you know, there hasn't been that investment. And we can certainly detect it in younger families as they contact us. You know, often they're searching for a group home and they ring me up and they say, what are you guys doing? We're really clear. We don't congregate people with disabilities together. You know, if people are friends or they have a natural relationship, then that's okay. But we wouldn't put people together to make the money work or whatnot. And so often people are surprised. They're like, really? Wow, that's possible, you know? And it's a real shame that investment hasn't occurred in making people aware that there are other ways to do this.
Yeah. And so what are sort of like the benefits? Like why would someone prefer a sort of more individualized option? What are the benefits for them as opposed to those more sort of traditional models?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, you know, when you tailor your arrangement around the person, nothing in this world is perfect, I've got to point out. We're not perfect. No one is perfect. Anyone who says they are is lying, you know. But that's just not humans, you know. Human beings aren't perfect, and there's all sorts of things that occur. But nonetheless, if you have an intent to really understand who the person is and what they really need in their life and design those things into your support arrangement, then you're much more likely to have a better life. You know, so for example, you know, if I had a car accident on my drive home today and I had a brain injury and you had to design an individualized service for me, you know, the things that matter to me are my kids and my family, the work that I do, you know, like I earn a living doing this, but I really care about it. I care about what I do. So if you had to design an individualized arrangement around me, you'd have to explain and support me to have a relationship with my family and my kids. You'd have to help me do work that makes me, you know, feel like I'm contributing to our society, you know? Mm-hmm. So an individualized arrangement allows you to look at those things in people's lives and build them into the arrangement. Now, in a situation, though, where I'm being put into a group home or into an institution, those places can try and do those things too, but it's much more difficult because, you know, the building is, the structure is set, you know, the building is set, the people who live there are set. There's one worker and 3 or 6 of us. You know, it's much harder to do those things and pay attention to who I am as a character. Yeah, the other advantages, though, I would say, is that these arrangements are highly dynamic, right? So now sometimes that might put people off them, actually. You know, they might think, well, I want to set things up and have it set and forget forever, you know. Certainly that's often what the NDIS, I don't know if that's what they would seek, but that's, you know, the vibe that we get sometimes from the NDIA. But these are not that. It's to say, you know, you set the person up in their house and you're like, okay, here's how we're going to do it. You know, this is the life you have and we're going to structure it this way. And then a year later, things are completely different because actually, you know, that thing they were doing yesterday doesn't work anymore. They want to do something else. They want to live somewhere else. They want to actually move house. So in an individualized arrangements, you can flex and change and adapt way more easily than you can in a congregated arrangement where the house is set, staffing set, who you live with is set. Change is much more difficult to do.
Yeah, and I guess that's reflective of real life, isn't it? Like I think about myself, you know, in a house, you know, in the last sort of 10 years, I've probably lived in 4 different houses with 4 different arrangements, housemates, more housemates, now with my partner. That's how life evolves, doesn't it? It's constantly in flux.
It's real life. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and so in some, like sometimes people might, oh, well, you know, the change is unsettling, but actually it's a good thing. It means if something's not working, we can change it. But if something is not working in a group home, it is much more difficult to change it because of all those other factors that are set, you know. I mean, I suppose the last thing I'd point out there's a difference would be that, you know, where you build your arrangement around one person, you focus your firepower and your energy on that one person, you know. But if you have a house with 3 people living in it, and I'm one worker and I'm supporting 3 people on a 8-hour shift kind of basis, you know, it means that I have to spread my focus and energy across 3 individuals. And typically, the person who has the greatest needs will absorb the most amount of focus and energy.
Yes.
You know? I mean, that's not that the workers or the organisation's bad. It's just to say that's just almost a mathematical reality. And so if you're that person living in the group home and you don't require so much attention, you're probably not going to get it, you know? And so you may not realize the life that you would otherwise achieve in an individualized arrangement where it's all focused about you.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I've definitely seen that with people with higher needs or quote unquote behaviors of concern. You know, a lot of the support sort of gets directed towards that person, and someone that's perhaps a bit quieter or has lower support needs can almost sort of get forgotten, and it's just, you know, basic needs are met rather than actually supporting that person to have a real fulfilling, exciting, fun and engaging life, isn't it? Yeah, cool. Okay. And how is sort of ILO, how is that sort of, we're talking about those traditional models versus this more individualized approach. How has that sort of evolved over time? Because obviously, you know, 1960s, 1970s, there was that move, there was deinstitutionalization, wasn't there? Can you talk a bit about that and how that sort of, you know, that's obviously the contextual background. How do ILO sort of fit into that whole bigger picture?
Well, that's a long-term kind of thing. Actually, do you mind if I go way back before that?
Go back, as far as you want.
So, okay, so before the Industrial Revolution, right? So when am I thinking here? Like 1700, 1800, you know, somewhere in about there, I don't know. Yeah. You know, people with disabilities were supported by families almost entirely, right? And actually, you know, the first person with a disability we know about was a Neanderthal skeleton, Neanderthal man that was found in a cave in Iraq in the 1950s.
Wow.
And, and this guy, they could tell from his remains that he must have had a vision and hearing impairment because of his skull, and also he had a scoliosis in his spine, which they could tell in his remains, such that he would not have been able to walk. Right. Now this guy lived 45,000 years ago, and he lived to be about 45 years old, which is incredible, right? Because I mean, you think about, you know, I don't know, 200-300 years ago, if you lived to be 45, you were doing great.
Yeah.
So this is the first person with a disability we know about, and when they found him, it posed the question of like, who supported him? Let me ask you the question: who do you think supported him?
Well, I guess, you know, going back, it's that saying, you know, it's the same thing with children. Like, it takes a community to raise a child or a village to raise a child. It's that community sort of support network, isn't it? So yeah. I'm guessing that as a community, you know, everyone bands together to make sure everyone's supported. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as far as we know, there was no NDIS or highly professionalized human service system. Maybe there was, I don't know, sort of Flintstone style. Yeah. But to be honest, the theory goes that most likely he was supported by his family, and you're right, the community, the tribe, whoever, you know, he lived with. The people who loved him supported him. most likely. And the reason why we think that is if you look through all of time and all different cultures and types of people, that's how people with disabilities have been supported up until the Industrial Revolution, right? So in the Western context, but this is echoed in other industrializing societies, you can see the same patterns occurring. So what happened in the Western world with the Industrial Revolution is that people fled the land, where people lived in small communities, farming and agriculture. They fled the land and they moved into big cities, and they got jobs in factories, So they were no longer working from home, They were working long shifts in factories in highly technical...
God forbid.
Yeah, that's right. So we think work from home is new. It's not. We always used to do it this way. Anyway, so as a consequence, in the Western world, thousands and thousands of people, vulnerable people, fell through the cracks of society in that massive societal change, right? So it wasn't just people with disabilities, but elderly people, people with mental illness, people with physical illnesses fell through the cracks. And the way that our society dealt with that was to create the first generation of institutions, which were known as workhouses. So they scooped all the people off the streets and put them into large institutions, and where they could, they put them to work to try and earn money for their upkeep. And essentially what our society did is they applied the industrial principles of their age. This is the thing they've just discovered, the factory. They applied it to human beings, which is to say, let's congregate as many people with disabilities together. Let's get maximum efficiency. So one worker, multiple people, and we have a production line of showering and personal care and feeding and so on to try and kind of do that. So the consequences of this were terrible for people with disabilities. Anyone listening or watching would know, have an understanding, I think, of what that did to people in terms of dehumanizing them and harm and so on. Now, although human services today are obviously much, much better than that, right? They are. There's no question. But the fundamental approach that they invented as a result of the Industrial Revolution still drives much of our human services today. So for example, if you look at a nursing home, if you visit an elderly person in a nursing home, it's the same thing. They have lots of people congregated together. The workers are good workers, and those organizations are good organizations too, by the way. But it's the same fundamental principle that drives that conduct. Over time, each generation of institution has got better, leading into the group home, if you like. But fundamentally, it's the kind of same thing. It's like we commission a place, we put people in there, and we try and gain maximum efficiency. And as a result, not intentionally, but often people are dehumanized, and they end up being treated as an object of care and as an object on a production line, sort of conceptually, So I suppose that's kind of a really snappy explanation of the history of human services. Individual living options, though, what we seek to do... Actually, I want to use a different term to individual living options, right? Just I'm going to go down that rabbit hole a little bit with you, if you don't mind, Dan. That's a type of funding, right? That individualized approaches don't require ILO funding necessarily, So it's a bit of a trap.
Yes, okay, I see the difference there. One is the funding framework, and the other is an approach that could be brought to any framework or any type of support.
Exactly right. In fact, most likely people who want individualized arrangements don't wish to use ILO funding anymore because of other problems, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, perhaps. Yeah. But nonetheless, sorry, that was a tangent there.
No.
But yeah, look. So I suppose what we seek to do through individualized arrangements, in some sort of form, they're generally highly relational. So, they tend to lean on live-in type arrangements, for example, where people live together and support the person as part of a network. They're often built around and centered upon relationships with families. So families are integral to the individualized living arrangement. So they visit a lot, that they're involved in the running of the arrangement often. At the very least, there's a focus on helping people genuinely build and maintain relationships with people. And in a way, what we seek to do is to kind of play to the strengths of human beings. That is, that we are relational, and we've evolved to be supported by people who love us, actually, not by, not in a cold, clinical, transactional, professional, highly professionalized way. That's sort of where we've come to. I don't know if that answers your question, though, Dan, about what happened after the 1960s.
Yeah, no, that was good. Yeah, it's so good to get that full background. And maybe this is the wrong question. I was going to ask, what are the different types of ILOs? But I guess being an approach, maybe the better question is, what are the more common scenarios if you're able to. I know everything is unique, but are you able to pull on some common threads there? Like you mentioned, co-resident or home sharer. Like, could you just talk through like a few of those sort of
Sure.
commonalities?
Well, within individualized arrangements, there are models of support, right? So just kind of, so conceptually, it's about who are you? We build the thing around you. But there are some common patterns, I guess, that people kind of, just let me talk to you though about some of those. So the first would be a host arrangement. So a host arrangement, which is pretty common. And it's not just in Australia, but throughout the Western world, probably beyond that, I suppose. But I'm certainly aware of the United Kingdom has many host arrangements, as does North America and US and Canada. So what this involves is a family or a person opening up their home and having a person with a disability come and live with them and supporting them in the same way they would support their a family member, a sister or a brother or a son. They generally are highly relational, as I say. And they kind of have their origins sort of conceptually in foster care. In fact, many foster carers might have fostered a child with a disability, and they continue to go on to live with them as a family once that person turns 18 and I guess enters the space of the NDIS. So that's one kind of common model of support within individualized arrangements. Co-residency is a bit different. Well, it's the flip side actually. It's to say I'm a person with a disability, and I open up my home and somebody comes to live with me, and supports me. And generally that would involve, the person would be paid a salary, typically. They would support the person and play a role in supporting them. There are other arrangements though, I've got to say, where known as home share arrangements, where the person might open up their home and have someone come live with them and it's not paid a salary, where they receive free accommodation, and in return for that they provide a presence in their life and support them. And there's usually some kind of sort of clear detail about like, here's what I need in my life in return for free rent. That particular approach, as I understand it, has its origins in the United Kingdom, especially around aged care. So elderly people in the, opening up their home and having students come and live with them for free accommodation and helping them out. But it's kind of morphed and changed, and each kind of one is a bit different. So there's some kind of common ways. I suppose though, what I would say is that people often, have a mixture of things, so there might be a co-resident, plus they go to stay with mum, plus they go to stay with somebody else, and there's a whole range of things that kind of go on. Actually, another facet I would, put forward is that most individual arrangements, certainly any of the one-to-ones involved with, have a range of people. It's never just one person who supports the individual. It might be a host or somebody, but in addition, there'd almost always be support workers, family, other people doing things, other providers, in fact, so that you have a range of people involved with the individual. And there's a couple of reasons why you want to do that, actually. For one thing, these are inherently personal and private arrangements. And so you want to make sure there's lots of people catching up and sort of have eyes on what's going on. So if something's not okay, there's lots of people who are going to raise the alarm and say, hey, that's not okay, and act as a safeguard.
Safeguard. Mm.
Yeah. The other bit of it, actually, though, Dan, is like, if you have a co-resident living with you and they're supporting you, the co-residents are humans and they're going to get sick and have to go back home to see, their dying parents, and, things will happen to them. And so if you have all your eggs in one basket, in one person who's supporting the individual, when those moments happen, you have less options, to call other people and say, hey, what are you doing today? Can you go and stay with Joe Bloggs today and help him out because such and such has had to go back home because of this thing? It enables kind of continuity of support, if you like.
Yeah, it sort of diversifies that risk there, doesn't it? And sort of prevent the risk of sort of care burnout and overwhelm if you can have a few people involved. We talk about communities and family support networks, previously, thousands of years ago. The world has changed though, isn't it? There's more demands on all of us. A lot of us are expected to work full time and we're pulled in a million different directions. So having some more people involved to all jointly support a person is probably a practical solution, isn't it? Rather than putting everything on one person.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And actually, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Familiarity breeds contempt. I don't know, but it's to say that if it's not healthy for people to be with the same person all the time. It's unsustainable. And so you want to make sure that people have time away from each other and have the typical patterns of life. And if you're a co-resident or a host, that you can have relationships of your own. If you don't do it for those reasons as well, then the arrangement is less likely to succeed because people will burn out and you'll have frictions and tensions in the relationship between people living together.
Yeah. And talk to us about your experience, personal experience, like as a younger man. I think you mentioned
Yeah.
you have been a co-resident before, and I think this is a guy that you went to high school with. Just tell us a
Oh,
little bit
well,
about
that's a
that. Is that
different
right?
story. But yeah, look, I
Yeah,
um, when I went to high school, I went to
yeah,
school with a guy called Bill, and Bill and his family are happy for me to share his story, you know. So when I finished high school, actually where I went to high school, it was an inclusive school. So the kids with disabilities were included in the mainstream high school. And so I knew Bill just around school. And so when I finished high school, Bill's mum rang me up one day and said, "Hey Rod, could you do support work?" And I said, "Okay, what do I need to do?" And she said, like, "Hang out with your friends, take Bill with you." I think that's what she said. You know, okay, I can do that, you know.
love it.
And so that kind of, how I got, that's how I became involved in, human services. And so, I've worked with Bill, but I worked with other people and, different places. I worked in group homes and congregate sort of services. And I was a young guy, I was, 17, 18, 19. And anyway, when I was 19, I decided I was going to go live in the UK for a few years, just to kind of have, not many Australians do, and have a bit of an adventure, I suppose. So I went to work in the UK, and I worked for about a month in a factory, and I hated that. I wasn't suited to factory work, it turns out.
Oh,
Anyway, I went to the job centre that they had, and there was a job there to provide support to a man with a spinal injury who was a quadriplegic. He'd broken his neck. And Paul had a really interesting life story for him. He'd been working in the Congo as a nurse in a bush hospital, and him and his friend were returning to along a bush road, and had a car accident, and he broke his neck. So he eventually returned to the United Kingdom, and even though he'd had this catastrophic injury, he was still really committed to the purpose of really bettering the lives of people. And so when I met Paul, he lived in his own place, and I became his co-resident. So I lived with him, and I probably wouldn't do it the way we did it then, because I didn't know what I know. We didn't know then what I know now,
yes.
But I lived with Paul for 2 years, and the way it would work is I was it for 4 weeks in a row, and then I would take a week off, and another person from an agency would come and stay with Paul. So that's how we structured it, and so that was a really powerful experience for me. I mean, it was before that I'd really kind of only thought about disability services in a congregate sense, group homes. I used to work for a service that I'd drive a van and pick up a bunch of people and do community activities and that kind of thing. And that's what that was my experience of disability services. And I guess it was those years with Paul that really made me appreciate there's a whole other way of doing this. But actually, one of the really powerful experiences that I had with Paul is he conducted a quality of life study of people with disabilities in third world countries. So as his co-resident, I travelled with him to Tanzania, and we interviewed countless people with spinal injuries in Tanzania, and basically asked them about their quality of life and kind of how happy they were, I think, fundamentally. Now, for me, Paul was doing the research, he was doing his master's, and I lugged him around.
Wow,
So
what an amazing opportunity, though,
yeah,
as a young guy to go to Tanzania and
it was great,
participate in
yeah.
that. Yeah.
It was a hard work, but it was a really powerful experience. We also went to Sri Lanka for 3 months, and again, we interviewed countless people in Sri Lanka who had spinal injuries about their quality of life. And the thing that I took away from that experience for me, just hitting record on his recorder and lugging them around, was that Sri Lanka is a poor country, and they don't have services and access to things like we do, However, in Colombo, the capital, there are people with disabilities have some services. We visited that they have access to a nurse, to a hospital. Most likely, they have a wheelchair. So not like we have, but something. But we interviewed countless people who lived outside of Colombo, kind of in the jungle, I guess. And I remember in particular going to visit this one fella who'd had like a car accident or something like that. And he'd been laying on a foam mattress for 10 years in the same hut, right?
Wow.
And we think, God, what a terrible life. And actually, no doubt, I'm sure if he had access to other things, he would definitely want them, right? But you know what? What we detected is that people living in the countryside in these sort of, kind of worse situations than perhaps people living in Colombo, they were actually much happier. They were much happier.
Wow, why was that?
Well, what it was is the guy who was living in the hut, he felt part of his community. every day people would come in from the village and listen to the cricket on the radio. They'd read the newspaper with him. We'd talk with him, and he knew what was going on for the neighbours and their kids, and it's a different way of life that they have compared to us, who kind of go to our houses and the doors closed and that's it. They were much more fluid in relationships and things. But he was definitely part of his community. Whereas the people who lived in Colombo were a bit more like people in Australia, where they were isolated, And what dawned on me in that experience was that what makes people happy is not disability services. It's not the services that make people happy. Actually, what makes people happy are relationships. It's like who loves you, who cares about you. They're the things that actually improve people's lives, not services. Now, it's not to say that services aren't important, of course. The guy in the bush would definitely have benefited from an access to a wheelchair, for example. That really stuck with me. And it was really clear in Paul's research that dynamic. And that was also the case in Tanzania as well. But from that example, I've carried that with me through my career in what I do, and I now bring that kind of realization, I suppose, to some extent, to one-to-one and the work that we do, focusing on the importance of relationships,
Yeah, awesome. And is there sort of an example that you can give of one-to-one, like that was then? Is there an example you could draw on from one-to-one support at the moment, and co-res or a home share, and what that sort of looks like in practice?
Mate, I'll use Bill. Actually, I started this story with Bill, and his family are okay for me to talk about him. So, as is Bill. I returned from the UK after a couple of years, and I decided, because I've been with Paul, he'd been doing his master's at university. I thought, what, I'm going to go back to Perth, go to university, and make this my career around disability supports. So I returned to Perth. Now, while I was away, Bill's family had gone through a bit of tumult. His parents had divorced. And Bill had ended up in a group home, And Bill, Bill is a man he has an intellectual disability, he has a physical disability, and like anyone would, he struggled with that change in his life. His parents were no longer there, and he'd end up in this place with people that he didn't choose. And as a consequence, he displayed some pretty challenging behaviours to himself and to others. And the provider that he was with at that stage, obviously they're concerned. They did the best that they could do, no doubt. But the way that was responded to was that he was moved from one house to the next. And each house, from my perspective, as his friend who would catch up with him, was that it was increasingly he was moved from one behaviour house to the next, and so he ended up in the kind of house full of people with difficult behaviours, and you can imagine from my perspective of him, that didn't make his life better. That made his life much worse, And also along the way, he became heavily medicated, and to the point that he could no longer speak. He stopped speaking like the few words that he could say, he stopped saying, and it was really upsetting for his family and for me, I guess, as his friend. At that stage, I was in my say mid-20s, I guess. And with his grandmother and his family, we hatched a plan to get Bill out of there. And
I love it.
So we did, and so what we did is we got Bill out of the house, and he moved in with some friends of mine in a share house. Now Bill's a guy with pretty complex needs, right? So I don't want to, for your listeners who kind of trying to imagine who he is, he's a complex person. Yeah. So the way it was structured is that I had a friend, Tracy, who owned the house. She was the bright one amongst us and bought a house early on. And she shared that house with a friend of ours, John, and her boyfriend, Josh, at the time, who was in the army. So John was engaged by a provider as Bill's, co-resident, I think. And but Josh and Tracy were just housemates, And so, and Bill lived there, God, I'm trying to remember how long it was. It feels like it was 18 months, maybe 2 years, might have been less, I can't remember, but it was something like around that space. And Bill, from my perspective, had the time of his life, right? He went from having like a pretty, isolated life in a group home to having people living in a share house with young people in their early, mid-20s. There was parties, there was girls, there was people coming and going. He loved it, And one of the things, though, I'll just tell you the story, and the family's happy for this, is that everyone wanted Bill to come off the medication because he was over-medicated, he really was. And so with support from the doctor and his organisation that is involved, Bill slowly came off the medication. He became his usual self again. He started talking and he was fine. But he did hit a point in this withdrawal where he became really unwell, And I remember specifically seeing him, and he was going through withdrawals, He was sweating and he was really unwell. And his behaviours really started to peak. The doctor basically said to Bill and to John, look, I think you need a bit of something to help with life, And as his friend, all these years later, I tend to agree, actually, that I think many people take medication, and I think I can see it in him that actually a little bit of something helps him get by, But this led to a rift because Bill's grandmother, who's a very formidable woman, was really clear, no, he must come off the medication. There we were as a network of friends, and John kind of, and the doctor saying, no, I think this is unwise. But this led to a fracture. And then over time, that fracture kind of grew. Eventually, the arrangement kind of was brought to an end because of the breakdown in the relationships, Right. And again, if I knew then what I know now, I might have handled that differently, I might have been different. So Bill then, he moved from, various individualized providers. But eventually, his family managed to get Bill his own house. And they recruited a co-resident, a wonderful man called Everett, who's an older gentleman. And Everett has lived with Bill now for 12 years. No, even longer than that, actually. He's a long time. Everett's lived with Bill. And actually, I've got to say, Bill was one-to-one's first person that we ever supported all those years ago,
Oh, wow. What a story.
So I suppose... over time, Bill's family's changed. So sadly, his mum and his grandma have passed away. His sisters are wonderful, and they have really stepped forward and taken up a role in his life, and they're really involved with him. And Bill's support arrangements changed. Like Everett's become older. There's a range of people involved, including, can I say, Tracy? Shout out to Tracy. She's a wonderful human being. She's back involved with Bill, and she stays with Bill a couple of nights a week. So I suppose I don't know if that provides a picture of a journey of somebody. His support arrangement now is quite different to what it was, and it will continue to evolve as things change and people get older and whatnot. But he's been able to maintain. Going back to the relational element of an individualized approach, Everett and Bill have a great relationship and they're very close. And for Bill, he's somebody who really needs stability in the people that are around him. When people come and go and change all the time, a rostered arrangement is no good for him because he needs stability in the humans that are in his life. And Everett's really brought that relationship and stability to him. And that's a wonderful thing for Bill.
That's awesome. And I'm conscious of time. I've got a few more questions I want to run through with you as well. If we go into the detail a little bit, like what does service design look like? Are there certain steps, if someone comes to you and says, hey, Rod, I have a family member, I've heard about this individualized approach. What are sort of the next steps? Do you go out and meet with the family and get to know their situation and in particular, look at their existing support networks? How does that all sort of work? How do you design that option?
For us, we use an approach called Optimal Individual Service Design. So it's a mouthful, OISD, and it was created by Dr. Michael Kendrick. People may not be familiar with Michael, but he's a really influential and very clever man I think he's from Canada originally, but I know he was a fixture of the North American kind of disability service space. And before the NDIS, our state government used to bring Michael to Perth, I don't know, twice a year. He'd run workshops with families about how can you support someone to live outside of a group home, So this is his approach to how you go about designing it. Many years ago, many providers in Perth undertook his training program, which we did, many of us who work here. And so that's the kind of the approach that we use. There's other ways to do it though, and I don't think people can do it any way they like really. But MAP and PATH are two other methods that people use. OISD is our one. So the way it kind of works is that we have a process of our service coordinator, separate to support coordinator, service coordinator. People get tripped up over that. They go through a process of interviews with the person with a disability, and then 2 or 3 or 4 people who know that person really well, So usually it's mum, dad, siblings, I don't know, Uncle Joe, whoever it is. And they have a series of interviews where they do them individually to try and, to make sure there's not groupthink or dominance of one person's view. And they talk through 21 domains of need, right? So the first domain that they talk through is usually pretty simple. It's nutrition. It's to say, tell me about food and what food means to you, And in that conversation, you discover all sorts of things about people. For some people, it might be that they have a peg and food is really complex and nutrition's complex for them. But for other people, it might be that they're Jewish or they're a Muslim or something like that, and they can't eat pork. For other people, it might be that we have lunch around Mum's house every Sunday. So we try to figure out, like, in that domain of nutrition, like, what are all the things that are important to this person that we need to know about. So as they go down the list of domains, there are a list of really basic, simple, things that you've got to ask about. Health, safeguards, money. How is money managed in your world? Those sorts of things. But we try to peel back the onion and we ask about deeper things, about life meaning. What is it that makes this person's life meaningful? And no matter how complex the person's disability is, there will be something at the core of them that is really important to them. It might be, like I said, for me, I get my life meaning from the work that I do and my kids and my family, that kind of thing. And what we're trying to do is identify from the person, the people who know them really well, what are those things?
Yeah, and that's different for everyone, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And if you don't design those things into the arrangement, it won't work. The person will have a crummy life, and if they're not happy, they'll make it not work.
Yeah.
So that's why you've got to really go, okay, so who is this person and what are the things that are really fundamentally important to them and how do we build them into the arrangement?
Yeah, like what happened with Bill, I guess, with those behavioural escalations and
Well, for Bill, he's a highly relational guy and he needs stability in the relationships that he has, So he's suited to a live-in kind of co-residence type arrangement. A rostered support arrangement won't work for him. That would drive him nuts. What we do is we have these conversations, we go away, we do analysis, we look for things that people all agree on, Rod must do this kind of work, or, Bill must do this or that, Equally, we look for things that people disagree about. You can imagine, often we do this, and Mum says one thing, Dad says a different thing. The siblings say, don't listen to Mum and Dad. It's like, so what we're doing there is we're identifying points of disagreement, because the moment that issue pops up and we set up this arrangement, if we haven't addressed it and being like really clear that you guys are disagreeing about this, the wheels will fall off straight away. People will start fighting and we'll get caught in the middle of it. So we do this analysis, and usually from there, like we pitch an idea. We go, okay, to help this person have the life they want in an individualized way, we think this is the best way to go about it. And normally we get it like 80% right in the first go. 80%, maybe, no, sometimes more than others, but because actually what we're doing is we're reflecting back to people the ideas, the knowledge that they already have, actually, But there's always something in there that they go, no, I don't agree with that. You got it wrong. You haven't heard that properly, And that's really important for us because it helps us clarify and really pinpoint, who is this person and how do we agree that they will be supported in partnership together. Once we've done that, then we would begin writing a service design proposal. They run from 15 pages to 50 pages, depending how complex the person is or whatever. But we really try and have it. What we're forming there is an agreement with the family, with the person, with us about here's what's family business, here's what's organisation business, here's how we go about it, here's who the person is, here's how their needs at a like basic level, but also at a deeper level, we aim to meet them. And that's our point to kind of then launch and set up the arrangement.
Yeah, awesome.
That makes sense?
I love that process. Yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, yes. Although it's different for everyone and it looks different for everyone, there are some sort of steps that you go through in that approach, aren't there? The service design steps, and you use that approach from the guy from Canada. Yeah, cool. Let's bring it home. You would have obviously read through the recent independent NDIS review. There's a recommendation in there I saw that's, I don't have the exact wording, but it says something like, for people with 24/7 support needs, a reasonable and necessary support, generally speaking, is a 1-to-3 sort of ratio. I just want to get your thoughts on that. Obviously, the sustainability of the NDIS scheme, sustainability is a huge focus, and I think in the recent budget, they've sort of capped the growth, or trying to cap the growth at 8% a year, I think. So that's obviously a really big focus. How do you think the future of home and living arrangements look, and how do ILOs tie into that? Is ILOs potentially the solution between having, meeting someone's needs in a person-centered way, and also by bringing in the family, by bringing in the community there, it's actually costing the government less as well? What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Well, okay. So I suppose I was disappointed that they used the rhetoric of 1 to 3, group homes as the funding benchmark, because it kind of that sends a signal to our community that group homes are the way forward. And actually, I guess for me personally, in my opinion, they are not the way forward. And
I think
again, I don't want to get anybody, but that's my personal.
Yeah. And I think there's a line in there that says at the bottom, we're not necessarily saying that people need to share with 1 to 3 ratio. That's just the funding level, and then within that, then it's over to the participant, the family, the providers to sort of figure out. I think the wording is more innovative housing and support options. But I think that piece of education, what that looks like, is missing in the community. People are like, what is that? What does that mean? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and you're right. Bill Shorten and the government has been clear that that's just the funding levels that we're going to set this at. But people can have flexibility. We want to create flexibility in the arrangements that people create. Which is, I think, is great. But I guess just signalling it, as a 1 to 3, as the people will take that as the expectation, which is probably a little bit tone deaf, given that the government just wound up a very expensive, very long royal commission into abuse of people with disabilities. And the upshot of that is that congregate arrangements have tended to be harmful to people. Again, those people who work there in those organisations are not bad. It's not that. It's just to say, So the NDIS review and the Royal Commission, were very close together in their reports. Anyway, look. I suppose in terms of that recommendation, I think, because I guess for me personally, I feel like an individualised approach is ethically and morally the right way to go forward in what we do. So therefore, whatever changes the government make, people will want to do that anyway because it's the right thing to do. In terms of the levels of funding, we support several people who have 1 to 3 SIL funding. And if you look at the entirety of their plan, we're still able to provide an individualised living arrangement for them. So I kind of feel like it will be okay. I think individualised arrangements, though, will probably do better because you're right. We can leverage freely given relationships from families and others to kind of achieve that mission for the person. Whereas if you run an institution, well, those tend to be less reliant on families, or less able to get families involved. So I think, the other thing about it for us is that we're pretty nimble and we're adaptable, and as long as we have strong partnerships and relationships between us as a provider and the families and people that we support, when these things change, we should be ready to adapt. Actually, on that point, I would really, urge any family that's thinking about this change, because it will be, almost certainly there's going to be a period of turbulence for people with disabilities and families and providers too. And that change will be stressful for everybody. I would urge them, though, to really seek strong, close relationships with the providers so that we go through this together. And then whatever comes out the other side of the assessments that the government is talking about, to reassess people's needs. And then, I guess potentially the context of that is to cut funding to people. I hope not, but that could be an outcome.
Makes me nervous.
Yeah, I think everyone, of course, that's what everyone's nervous about. But whatever comes out the other end of it, then we've got to work together to go, okay, well, here's what the outcome is. What do we do now? How do we reshape this so that the person continues to have the life they want within this funding envelope? So as long as we do that, we'll be able to work together. I suppose actually the other sort of tangent finally is that obviously the government is talking about removing support coordination, from our system. And many families rely on people like you, Dan, and circles of support to help navigate and make sense of the world. So, when this process of assessment and funding reviews and navigation, as they call it, occur, it may be in a context where families have lost their support coordinator, in which case providers like us, we're going to have to fill the void that you guys have filled. Now I hope that's not the case, by the way, for you and for our system, but that's kind of part of our role has to be ready to help people navigate that stuff. Otherwise I guess they may be left at the mercy of the NDIA and whatever structures they've created to help them get a good life.
Yeah, I think the only certainty, there's only recommendations at this stage, aren't they? The only certainty is that there will be change. I think those organisations that are able to be flexible and dynamic and change and innovate are probably going to be the ones that survive and do well and provide high quality support to people. I think this whole housing support option, like seeing it even not just in the disability community, but with the housing crisis and the undersupply of housing, you mentioned, people living in older people's houses, students, rent-free, people are building granny flats. Like, I think that innovative housing piece is sort of applicable to the whole community, isn't it? Not just the disability community. But we could probably talk about this for another hour, but let's wrap up. It's been amazing to have you on the NDIS Circle, Rod. I've really enjoyed our discussion. I've learned heaps today, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Rod. See you guys. See you next week.